What's up, world, and welcome to the All Real Show. This is where we discuss issues pertaining to the socioeconomic system and how they relate to everything. Why and how are the fundamental questions. Answer them enough, you get to the truth. I'm your host, Alex, and my guest today is the author of several books, including No Rich and No Poor, The Populist Goal We Can and Must Win, Divide and Rule, The Left versus Right Trap, The Israeli Ruling Class Exposed, It Exposes Ordinary Jews as well as Palestinians, and The People as Enemy, The Leader's Hidden Agenda in World War II. He also created and edits NewDemocracyWorld.org and PDRBoston.org. And I've personally looked on both sites pretty extensively, and there's a wealth of information and insight on both sites, as well as the books. And he's also created and is the administrator on Facebook's Egalitarian Revolution group. Please welcome my inaugural guest, John Spritzler. Thank you so much for being with me today, John. And you stay pretty busy, huh?
Yeah, but I'm retired, so I have time.
That is true. It's a huge thing when you're working in, a 9 to 5, so to speak, and the time allotment for stuff that you actually want to pursue. I know that firsthand.
Yeah.
And speaking of retired, you also studied at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And I think that's pretty interesting. Did you go to school for that in particular, to study there?
I got my doctoral degree in biostatistics there. I got the degree after 4 years in 1992, and then was hired to work as a research scientist at the Harvard School of Public Health. It wasn't called the T.H. Chan School then, because Mr. T.H. Chan hadn't yet given them $400 million, and which caused the name change. So I worked there as a research scientist, as a biostatistician, where my focus was designing and analyzing AIDS clinical trials, which I did for 20 years and then retired. That was my second career. I was a high school math teacher before that.
Oh, that's really neat. How long did you do that for?
10 years.
10 years.
Well, maybe you could say that was my second career, because when I got out of college, I was an SDS regional traveler for a few years. And SDS, as your older listeners will know, was Students for Democratic Society, the big anti-war, anti-Vietnam War organization. And so as soon as I graduated, I just kept organizing against the war on college campuses, including the one I graduated from.
That's interesting to me about the research you did there. I read one of your posts where you were talking about, of course, the funding that goes on in universities and colleges, and of course the money trail, right, where it comes from, and why research is done that is done. And you don't have to go on extensively, but with your sort of doing it, were you, as far as the AIDS trials, were you directed kind of, what to do? How did that work in general?
Okay, the answer to your question is this. I was a biostatistician, and I collaborated with MD doctors with MD degrees, and together they and I and other people formed the study team for a study. Now, the idea for a study, in other words, the coming up with the question which the study was designed to answer. Mm-hmm. Typically, it would be the medical doctors who would come up with those questions. And these are doctors who had a practice, had a lot of patients who were HIV infected, but were also doing research. And this was the way they did their research, is they worked in a group called the AIDS Clinical Trials Group, which was funded by the National Institutes of Health. And the AIDS Clinical Trials Group did huge clinical trials where patients would be enrolled in multiple clinics or hospitals in multiple nations. It is the largest clinical trials group in the world for any disease.
Right.
And so I participated in the AIDS Clinical Trials Group, the ACTG, as a biostatistician, because the group at the Harvard School of Public Health that did support for it employed me to do that. And in the course of doing that, I collaborated with doctors from all over the United States and other countries as well. And we would have conference calls and meetings, frequent big conference meetings and so forth. And it would be at these big meetings that the scientific agenda would be discussed and formulated. And by the way, interestingly, after they fought a big fight to make it the case, the HIV-infected people who were referred to as, quote, the community, they became part of the decision-making process about what questions should be asked in the scientific agenda. So it wasn't just, people with MD degrees and so forth. And anyway, so typically what would happen is that a doctor would come up with an idea for a question that should be addressed by a clinical trial, and then the first step they would do would be to start working with me to figure out how to define the question precisely in scientific terms, how to figure out how large a clinical trial, how many subjects it would take to answer the question, how the trial should be designed in terms of the nature of the randomization and so forth. And then we would work to, the doctors would typically write the section of a document called the protocol, which had the rationale, and that's where the argument was made why it was worth spending a lot of money to do this study. And if there was an experimental treatment, as typically there was, all the reasons why one could have some hope based on earlier laboratory studies or whatnot for why the experimental treatment might be successful. And if the rationale was persuasive enough, then the document would be passed to other review bodies, and it would have to get approved. Ultimately, the approval is for the federal government, the National Institutes of Health, to say, okay, we're going to give you, $50 million to run this study. Now, part of what makes a study doable is if it has a drug, which almost always was the case, that was part of the experimental treatment, or even the standard of care treatment on maybe the non-experimental treatment arm, the pharmaceutical company that made the drug would typically donate the drug for free in order to get a scientific study, about their drug.
Right.
But if they didn't want to do it, then they didn't have to do it. And a lot of times, a study that should have been done for scientific reasons ended up not being done purely because the drug company decided not to donate the drug. And I'll give you a specific example. And it's been many years now. I forget the name of the drug company, but I think it was something like Hearst Pharmaceuticals or something like that. They had a drug called pentoxifylline, which we did a study at a low dose because it was the first study. This drug was the experimental treatment for patients with HIV infection who were wasting away, losing lots and lots of weight, which is what happened to HIV infected people before the famous cocktail was was developed, which hadn't been developed yet at the time I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And as was frequently the case in the kind of studies I was involved in, the conclusion of the trial showed that there was marginal but not statistically significant evidence that pentoxifylline was useful, efficacious, as they say, for this wasting disease. But the doctors who were involved in the study all thought that it was highly suggestive that a higher dose would be effective. And since there were no serious side effects from the lower dose, it seemed like a no-brainer to have a follow-up study with a slightly higher dose.
Right.
So I was asked by the doctors to design the study, which I did. And then we went to the pharmaceutical company to ask them to supply the drug, pentoxifylline, for the study. And to our surprise, they said no. So do you want to guess why they said no?
Of course, I'm curious. Yeah, why would they say no?
Because the patent on pentoxifylline was going to run out too soon to make it worth their while to have a study showing it was useful.
I see. So essentially they wouldn't have total control over the drug anymore.
That's right. It wouldn't be making money for them.
Right.
So the study was never done. And that is typical of how decisions are made in this context. The drug company was the powerful player. They had the veto. Exactly.
And, John, really, I know, and I know you do too, that is the reality, right? That everything, whether it's a drug, testing of cures and diseases, all the way down to, what funding schools get, to, what is done in public works as far as roads and stuff. It's truly all the money. It's all about the money, and the money is the power. The money is the control.
Yeah, let me just add another example about HIV, since
please.
Not that HIV is the most important example in this, but it's one I had, my experience with.
Exactly.
The Bill Clinton administration, the national security advisor was a man named Sandy Berger.
I remember the name, yes.
Yeah, he wasn't that famous, but he was Bill Clinton's national security advisor.
Mm-hmm.
And he declared HIV to be a national security threat. Now you might say, well, that's interesting. Why? Why was it a national security threat? And the answer is, when he was interviewed and had to sort of explain his decision, he said that in Africa, the governments that are dictatorships of one sort or another, and U.S.-friendly regimes, were in jeopardy of losing their ability to control the population, because the young men in the military, who were the exact demographic that HIV was striking in Africa, were dying at a too high a rate to make the armies reliable. So it was a national security threat. The fact that other people were dying of the disease, that's not what made it a national security threat.
Exactly. Yeah, it was the control for the elite, essentially, is
Yeah, it's like the elite in general want to be in control of everything. That if they're not in control of something, that worries them, and so they want to be in control of food production. Hoover, before he was, after he was president,
mm-hmm.
was in charge of using food after World War II against the communists by controlling food that people in communist nations needed and using it as a lever to control. But you can't do that unless you have a lot of food to dangle, right?
Exactly.
So from Hoover's perspective, figuring out how to grow a lot of food was important, but not to make sure that everyone was eating well, but to make sure that they're able to control people by controlling food.
Exactly. And, it's public record. I mean, a lot of people probably don't know, but, you can look it up. I had an almanac back in, I think it was 1992 or something, that actually diagrammed and showed the tree of the parent companies that people have never heard of their name and how it branched down to the other corporations and businesses that they own. And when you see that, and that's, the truth, I mean, it's right there. Anybody can find it out that looks it up. You see that literally everything that you and I and everyone knows is owned by the same entities. The from the production of the food to the transportation to the, resources. It's, and so it's really easy when you see that to understand how things are controlled.
Yeah, and it's gotten more concentrated by far since I think you said 1992, or is that what you said?
Yeah, right. Well, and it's I think, John, also it's just something that when it's always going to be more and more concentrated because that is the way money works.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the simple explanations is if I have $1 million, I put it in the bank, I can, go sit on my butt for 6 months or a year, not do anything for society, but I make, $10,000, 20 whatever interest on my money, but you don't have enough money to buy a home. So you take a mortgage loan and you pay 10 or 20,000 in interest that comes up to me.
Yeah.
So it's really inevitable. It's not a byproduct of the system. It is inherent in the system that this is how things work. There's really no way around it. And
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and I know, of course, that's what got my attention with you is the egalitarianism and I think that's exactly what it is. That's what it should be. That's how it started, of course, if you look back at, civilization, using that word loosely, but that's what it is, and everybody was helping each other. And then, you fast forward till you have, again, business and money, a monetary system and a market system come into play. Now you have, control, you have the ownership. And, when there's profit involved, of course, that is what it becomes, right? That's what it's all about. And
yeah, the most important message I have, I think, for your listeners and everybody else that I can reach ever, is that contrary to what a lot of people think, almost everybody in the general public wants to remove the rich from power, to have real, not fake democracy, because they know it's fake now.
Right.
With no rich and no poor. And that's the heart of what egalitarianism is about. And the reason that I can claim with confidence that almost everybody wants this is because I've spent probably 1,000 hours on the street, mostly in Boston, but also some in New Hampshire, asking random passersby if they think that's a good idea or a bad idea. And 90% say it's a good idea or a great idea. I've discovered this to be the case over and over and over and over again. And this is whether I'm standing in a white neighborhood or even a somewhat wealthier neighborhood or black neighborhood in Boston or in conservative New Hampshire where they listen to Rush Limbaugh instead of NPR. Same result, though. I've done this. I know. And I know that people, are probably skeptical hearing me say this. And the reason they're skeptical, I think, is because you never see people saying, let's remove the rich from power, have real, not fake democracy with no rich and no poor on television or on the radio. You never see them being quoted to that effect on the newspaper or magazines or even the alternative press, for that matter. Not even, like Democracy Now!
Yeah.
You don't see it. And so that creates the impression that, well, people must not feel that way, or else how come we never see them expressing that point of view? Of course, the point of view is censored. That's why we don't see it. It's censored.
Right.
And then the censorship creates the feeling in people that no one else feels that way, so they better keep their mouths shut, or else they'll be viewed as a crazy person. So it becomes a taboo to express such a view. But if you actually go on the street in front of a grocery store or a laundromat or, CVS drugstore or something,
mm-hmm.
and just ask people who are walking by, do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea? Let's remove the rich from power, a real, not fake democracy with no rich and no poor. You'll find out for yourself. You don't need to believe me. You'll see 90% of the people, unless you're in Beverly Hills or some rich town,
exactly.
are going to say it's a good idea or a great idea. And that's the reason why egalitarian revolution is possible. I'm not saying it's easier, but it's possible, because if it's what most people want, then it's possible to make happen.
Yes, I agree with everything you just said. And a lot to me, John, it's not asking a question per se. I mean, a lot of people question things in general. To me, it's asking the right question. And to me, what I've read from what you've wrote and things that you say and videos you've made, that's what I understand about you, is that you ask the right questions. You understand the right points that aren't made. Like you said just now, and you've said before, you watch all kinds of news, so-called news, and Republican, Democrat, and Independent, yet they all talk about, what they don't mention is just as important as what they do mention, and they purposely omit things of that nature. You talk about, a big tax thing, and you've commented on this, and I totally agree with you 100%, where, they'll say, Jeff Bezos or whoever, all these rich people, they have to pay their fair share. And so then they go into detail about what is their fair share and how should we tax them, instead of the real issue and real question of saying, wait a minute, what kind of system do we have that allows one individual to own more wealth than close to half of the world's population? Yeah,
right. As if making them pay a little bit bigger tax would make it okay.
Exactly. It's a Band-Aid solution. It's, and again, you've pointed this out, so I know you feel the same way, and I totally agree that if you look throughout history, that is what is done. I mean, every ruling class, has understood that's what you do. You essentially rule the people, and then when they rebel or act up enough, you give them just enough to shut them up and and appease them.
Yeah, which is, that's why we got the New Deal, which they were scared to death in the 30s because they were literally afraid of imminent revolution. They were sending the National Guard to multiple parts of the country with orders shoot to kill because of the huge labor strikes that were often explicitly revolutionary in their goal, not just, for higher wages.
Right.
And even when they weren't, they were so militant that it was clear that the newspapers, like the New York Times, were calling them insurrections and civil war. We're not taught our own history in the schools, so most people don't have any knowledge of what the ruling class was afraid of, what working people were doing in the 20s and 30s. And because of not having that knowledge, people are easily persuaded of the fairy tale idea that we got Social Security and the right to form a labor union and unemployment compensation because this nice man named FDR got elected president and gave us these nice things.
Exactly.
They don't understand that it had nothing to do with FDR being president. It could have been Genghis Khan sitting in the Oval Office, and the ruling class would have had to give us something like the New Deal to avoid the revolution that was developing in this country.
Right. Exactly, and that's that you said it perfectly. That is the point. It's all throughout history. You can pick any president, any king, queen, for that matter, any pharaoh. And change the name, and you change what they give them, what they give the people. But it's the same scenario over and over.
And another point about this that I think is important for people to understand is that whenever you have an upper class dominating and oppressing a lower class, and this, it doesn't matter if it's a slave-owning class like the slave owners in the American South before the Civil War turned it into a Jim Crow system, or if it was a feudal system where you have an aristocratic class dominating the peasants and exploiting them, or the capitalist class like we have today.
Exactly.
Whenever you have an upper class dominating a lower class, the upper class has to treat the lower class like dirt, because if they don't, well, then if they treat the lower class with the same dignity and respect that they treat each other, then that doesn't do what's necessary to maintain the class inequality, which is to keep lower class people in their place, make them think that they're less deserving, that it's sort of right and proper, that they should be treated with less respect and dignity than the upper class, and to that you treat the lower class like dirt to keep them in their place and to make them accept their place at the bottom of society. So they have to treat us like dirt, and they do over and over and over again.
Yes.
In ways that are so common that people don't necessarily think of it in these terms, because it's like the water that the fish swims in. After a while you just take it as just you don't think about it, but
exactly.
People know they're being treated like dirt. Like, for instance, when retail workers are put on call, so they have to be ready to come to work whenever the phone rings and says come in, but the phone might not ring, and they can't plan their life around anything because it could ring any time, and if it rings, they've got to get a babysitter or something, which at the last minute, but they only get too few hours of work, so they don't get the benefits that require at least 35 hours of work. They're treated like dirt. And I think that what we need to do to build a movement is to identify the ways that people are treated like dirt, and to start saying that this is why we need to remove the rich from power, and to build on the anger that people have because of all the ways they're treated like dirt. And the reason I'm focusing on this is because some people don't seem to understand this, and they think that the way to build a movement is to try to persuade people that secret crimes that the ruling class is doing, which people do not know about, things
right.
like putting poison in chemtrails, coming out of the jets, or poison vaccinations, or Monsanto poisoning our crops and so forth. These are terrible crimes, but they're not crimes that are as visible to people as the example of the retail workers being put on call, and there's no way that most Americans are going to know and be confident that these crimes are happening, because they're secret crimes.
Right.
And it takes, for a secret crime, the only way people are going to know in large numbers that it's happening is if the equivalent of Walter Cronkite on CBS 11 o'clock news announces it.
Right.
But that's never going to happen as long as the rich are in power. So we need to remove the rich from power based on the anger that people have about the crimes that everybody knows about, the way they're treated like shit. And when we remove the rich from power, well, that's when we can go into the file cabinets and the hard drives and find out the truth about all these what are called conspiracy crimes or conspiracy theory crimes, and
right.
Find out what the truth is and so forth, and prevent them from happening. But we're not going to prevent these conspiracy type crimes from happening by trying to persuade the general public that they're happening, because the evidence is too obscure and hidden, and the ruling class media is never going to announce it.
Exactly.
So,
yes.
That's, I think, an important point, that people are being treated like dirt in a million different ways. Homeless people living in tents in all the southern warm states, there are thousands of people in Los Angeles and Florida living in tents. You don't need a secret memo to prove that. Everyone living in the tents knows it's true.
Right. Yeah, that's what I mean. I agree with everything that you say. I mean, you're really on point, and that is, I know I'm into a lot of the deeper stuff too, and I talk with friends that say, well, exactly what you're saying. Well, we got to expose this. And yeah, if people don't rise up or react or put their foot down on stuff that they know is happening, then exactly how are you feasibly going to it's too much. It's too much down the rabbit hole, and a lot of it you don't even have access to in reality at this point because of
those fires in Northern California last year. So there, if you go down the rabbit hole, you can find evidence that's reasonably alarming that suggests that it was caused by some kind of satellites with high energy weapons or something like that for God knows what evil reason. Okay, but I cannot prove that.
Right.
You cannot prove it, and even if we had some kind of smoking gun, some obscure smoking gun, so how many people could we make see that smoking gun with the what we have available in a way that would be convincing and persuasive? Not that many.
Right.
Not that many. It's the nature of these crimes that they are secret.
Right.
That's their nature innately, and that doesn't mean they're not horrible. That doesn't mean that they're not grounds for overthrowing the criminals from power. But because they're secret, they're not going to be the basis for a large enough movement to remove the criminals from power.
Exactly. And what I go to when I get in a conversation like this about, exposing or, what to rise up against type of thing, I inevitably, every time I go to 9/11, because everything you were saying, I used to wonder. I was born after JFK, but when I saw that one footage and heard the different accounts, and it's pretty obvious his head moves both ways, those types of things, but I used to think to myself, yeah, but how can you prove it? Kind of like what you're saying now, and they're just never going to come out, and these types of things. Then 9/11 happens, and up to this point you have a countless number of every single evidence that's ever come out has been contradicted the official story, and it's not even evidence, it's basic physics. Buildings do not fall in.
Are you aware that it is now a majority of the population that thinks the government is not telling us the truth about 9/11?
I do, actually, yes. And they also the grand jury in New York is going to the district attorney, finally, the evidence was so overwhelming and so, stacked up that there's going to be a grand jury, hearing on the evidence to see if it can go to trial.
Yeah. But even with 9/11, it's still the people do not have any personal experience about what happened in 9/11, except so they saw the television. People saw the images and everything, which could be fake for that matter. But people don't have personal experience on the basis of which to know the truth with confidence.
Well, they don't,
so
John.
In that sense, is still a secret.
For me, though, this is the reason I always go to 9/11 is because, to me, it's not about a belief. It's not about even, if you believe the official story, if you don't, those types of things. Because there is, especially on the second building, there is countless number of videos that are not doctored that you can go on YouTube and watch. You can see the actual news footage that came straight from the news source. These buildings were huge concrete and steel structures, and they fall in their own footprint at free fall speed, meaning even a layman, if you don't understand physics, all you have to do is think about that for a second. That is physically impossible, because that means it's going through the path of most resistance. Not only is it going through the path of most resistance, but it's going at free fall speed, meaning there is nothing impeding that building collapsing. Otherwise, it would take 30, 40, 50 seconds, and obviously it wouldn't fall all the way. It would fall sideways. But that's the thing about
I've made the same arguments that you're making, but maybe you're addressing your audience more than me, in which case, go ahead.
Well, no, I'm not addressing you. I believe that you're fully aware of it. And, yeah, I'm kind of throwing it out to the audience, but, you know, just kind of making the point of what you're saying. And I agree, you can't go that route because those things are unprovable. But if I get into a conversation with somebody and you're saying this needs to be exposed, that needs to be exposed, and I don't mean you, I just mean an average person. The first thing I say is, what do you think about 9/11? And if you say anything essentially other than what we know to be true, that buildings don't fall at free fall speed and stuff like that, then I don't know. I feel like we can't go past that because you're saying these other things, yet something that is provable, you can look up yourself and
Well, I would love for some kind of authority, the equivalent of. You were born after JFK. I don't know if you remember watching Walter Cronkite on TV. You might not be old enough.
I was born in '76.
Well, I forget what
I do remember Cronkite, but not, extensively.
Anyway, I'm using him as a symbol for a trusted authority. He was known as the most trusted man in the United States. I think he was the anchor for CBS and the 11 o'clock news. And he was known as the most trusted man in the United States. When he returned from a trip, an investigatory trip to Vietnam during the war, he announced, as no other media person ever had before, that the war was unwinnable. Now, he didn't say it was an unjust war, which would have been better, of course, but he said it was unwinnable. And that is what opened the floodgate for the public to start thinking it was unwinnable and therefore we should get out. And that's what caused President Lyndon Johnson to remark that he said, I lost Walter Cronkite. And because of that, that's when he decided not to run for a second term. So in order for 9/11 to become a kind of issue which would cause the general public, not just, a bunch of people, like you, but the general public, to view the United States government as criminals, for doing an inside job of 9/11, it would take something equivalent to Walter Cronkite, whatever it was, some kind of official investigatory committee that was as legitimate as anything could possibly be, to come to that decision and announce it. And I'm pretty skeptical that that's going to happen. I would love it to happen. I know that people are trying to make it happen in New York, and I'm not, my crystal ball's in the repair shop, so I can't tell you for sure what's going to happen or not. But I'd be very, very skeptical that there will be a declaration of the truth that 9/11. I'm convinced it was an inside job.
Right.
That 9/11 was an inside job, with the kind of declaration that would result in the general public feeling as confident of that fact as the general public ended up feeling confident that the Vietnam War was unwinnable.
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. And again, you nailed it. I mean, that's perception. That's another big one for me. It's because like you said, we could say it, if you're go on a popular web show and say it, but it doesn't have that authoritative feel. It doesn't have that, true ring to it, but yet someone that you see daily that for some reason you trust says it, you think differently. That's where the average mindset loses me, honestly, because I feel with anything, whether it be 9/11, whether it be, talking about, things that happen to you at work and those types of things, if you just look at it independent by itself and question it, but I know exactly what you're saying, John, and it's true. The general population tends to be general thinking. And
let me give the other side of the coin, which is what I'm doing here in my local neighborhood, in terms of organizing approach.
Yes.
I live in Boston, Massachusetts, and Boston consists of about 10 or 12 named neighborhoods, like each of them is like a zip code. And the two zip codes that are called Brighton and Allston, where I live in Brighton, have always been considered sort of one neighborhood, called Allston Brighton sometimes, or Brighton Allston.
Okay.
One of them used to be a part of the other, which is why they're sort of connected that way. Anyway, it's a neighborhood that in Boston which is mainly white, mainly working class and student. There's a lot of students because the universities, Boston College and Boston University, a lot of the students of those colleges live in Brighton, Allston. And it's a neighborhood which has been experiencing gentrification big time because the new housing developments that realtors or real estate developers are coming in, building these large housing developments that are almost all luxury rentals or luxury condominiums. And of course, that raises the rents generally and raises the property taxes, and that forces the longtime working class residents to have to leave because they can't afford the rising rents,
right,
or property taxes. Even if they own their own home, the property taxes go up. And so there's a lot of everybody knows this is going on. Everybody knows it's no secret. And there's a lot of anger. Well, there's an organization that just was formed called the Brighton Allston Community Coalition, and it formed in last April, and it's aiming to get as members everybody who lives in Brighton Allston, whether they own their home or whether they rent or whether they're a student. And one of its main demands is to get more affordable housing, and specifically to demand that these new developers have to have at least 20% of the units be affordable housing, not these luxury condos.
Okay.
And so I'm recruiting people to join the organization, the Brighton Allston Community Coalition. It's called the BACC. But the way I'm recruiting them is I'm asking them to not just join, but to sign a statement. And the statement, it's a 2-sentence statement. And it says, "We, the undersigned, joined or are hereby joining the Brighton Allston Community Coalition the BACC, because its goals, including adequate affordable housing and good public transportation and an end to gentrification, are part of our larger goal, removing the rich from power, to have real, not fake democracy with no rich and no poor. We hope that the BACC will declare that it also aims for this larger goal. That would make us be even more enthusiastic members of it. Well, nice. I've been on the sidewalks collecting signatures. I got 444 memberships this way.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And the organization only has, according to its last letter it sent to the mayor, quote, more than 350 members. So I've more than doubled the membership already, I think, or just, and I intend to get 1,000 signatures, which won't be hard. And on the basis of all these people joining the organization and saying explicitly that they want to declare that it's for removing the rich from power, real, not fake democracy with no rich and no poor, in other words, egalitarian revolution.
Right.
They're saying they want the organization to become an egalitarian revolutionary organization. Well, I'm hoping to make that happen. And if that happens, it'll be the first organization with, substantial membership of ordinary people declaring that it's for egalitarian revolution in 100 years in the United States. I count the Wobblies in 1917 as being such an organization, because essentially they didn't use the word egalitarian, but they were for abolishing the wages system, and essentially that's what they were talking about.
Right.
But it's been 100 years since there's been any organization that has been advocating removing the rich from power this way. And I include the Communist Party, which they did not advocate that either in the 30s and so forth. So yeah. I think that there's a good possibility that this organization will become an egalitarian revolutionary organization. And the way that it will happen is not by my talking about 9/11 or the forest fires in California or vaccinations or these secret crimes. It's by talking about what everyone is pissed about, the lack of affordable housing. And if we build a movement this way that removes the rich from power, we'll solve the problem of the vaccinations and the forest fires and the chemtrails and inside jobs like 9/11. We'll solve those problems by removing the criminals who do them from power.
Exactly.
That's how I think we can actually win.
Well, I totally agree. I think that's awesome. You added that in instead of just leaving just pertaining to the issue at hand. You included that in the bigger picture. That's great, obviously, and that you got that many signatures. And I have no doubt you'll get 1,000. Because like you said to start, I do think most people, they understand things aren't fair. They understand, there's elites and those types of things, and it's not a fair system. And, we're all here.
And by the way, I want to point out, this is important.
Yeah.
What I talk to people as they're walking by me on the sidewalk is affordable housing. That causes them to stop. Mm-hmm. And then I ask them, if you agree with this statement, to sign it, but you have to read the whole thing. And people read it. 9 out of 10, you know what their question is after they read it about removing the rich from power and everything?
What's that?
Where do I sign? I'm serious.
Oh no, I know you are. I'm that's a happy laugh.
That's the question. Where do I sign?
Yeah, and it's probably more we could get into in a little bit of time than we have right now, but I do think I again wholeheartedly agree with you, John, that I think the majority of people would say yes. The majority of people would say, I agree. Where do I sign? Let's do this. And then I think it goes to part 2, which is the harder part. Just to kind of quote here your description too. I had a couple of things here we didn't get to, but it's fine. I'd like to have you back on at some point anyway. But on the Amazon description of your book, No Rich, No Poor, you say that, most Americans, like elsewhere, of course, would love to remove the rich from power, have real, not fake democracy. And the main reasons, you give two main reasons why it hasn't happened. And you say, one, people don't know the vast majority want it to happen because the mass media keep it a secret, and therefore you think it's impossible, like we touched on earlier. And two, and this is where kind of what I'm saying now, you're right, because you put it down yourself, but I think this is where the second part, the hiccup is, and you say the other reason is people have doubts it would or could work and be desirable because they know how ugly and anti-democratic communism was and is. Now, of course, you just use communism as an example, but the would or could work, I think, is where a lot of people end up, because they'll say yes. A lot of people I talk to too, they say they understand, and things are wrong and unfair and unjust, but then it's always, well, what do you do? And of course, you're doing an excellent job. There's a lot of people that do things, and I think it's like going in, everybody's going in a direction. Granted, it's the right way, it's the positive way. But just to kind of conclude, I personally feel like they're essentially, to put it in a term, there has to be a blueprint, an actual laid out, planned out, because part of the issue is, like you're saying with the housing thing, the elite controls the resources. So even if you say, well, we're going to start our own little town, and, that I'm just hypothetically saying that, but you still have to acquire all the resources to do it. And because we're stuck as of now in this market monetary system, you are forced to pay for those services. Granted, you could get some donated and volunteers, but to do any big, step forward, it's going to require a lot of resources.
Yeah, this is a whole another hour's worth of great discussion. You're raising all the important questions.
I know, John. I'm sorry.
Going to have that discussion with you because I've thought a lot about it, and I think there are some important things to say that address the important questions you're raising.
And I sincerely would love to have that conversation with you. I think you're an amazing person. I've read a lot of what you've done. I see what you do. And to me, it's one thing to say you care, but it's another thing to act on it. And you, without a doubt, act on it. I think you're extremely intelligent, insightful. I've really enjoyed conversating with you, and I really would like to have you back on for another show at another time. And I would love to pick up right where we left off, because I think that's the nugget, so to speak, right there. That is the juicy part of kind of what we're both getting at here. So I really want to thank you for your time and everything you said. It's been very insightful.
Well, thank you very much, Alex, and give me a call when you want to do it again, and I'll, if I'm able, I'll be willing.
That sounds great, John. I really thank you. I do, and I definitely will. We'll be in touch, and we'll do it again soon, hopefully.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I'll sign off, okay?
Okay, John. Thank you so much.
Take care. Goodbye.
All right, you too. Bye.